On June 18th, 9 people were murdered at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. I won't dignify the man by even stating his name, but his stated reason was to start a race war. This was a man who was capable of going in, praying with people for an hour, and then shooting them. So far, his actions have not ignited a race war. His vile behavior had an effect he probably didn't anticipate, because the discovery of photos of him holding the Confederate battle flag, technically the battle standard of the Army of Northern Virginia, have resulted in major backlash against this symbol. Now, I cannot adequately describe the despicable nature of his actions. I can't wrap my brain around how someone does something like that, the hatred that must be in his heart, or the causes of that hatred. And it's hard for me to fully comprehend anything that happened that night. But I do think I can understand the reaction against the flag. Now, in fairness, I have no emotional connection to some of the symbols of the Confederacy, including the flag. But I am a Southerner by choice, not by birth, and some would say that would disqualify me, perhaps, from fully understanding what's going on. So admittedly, I was born in New York. But if you count all the states I've lived in and all the years I've lived in the South versus the northern states that existed at the time of the war, I'm a Southerner by about 75%, give or take. And I've also chosen to live my life here in Tennessee. So when I speak on this topic, I speak as someone who likes the South, who cares about the South, and cares about the image that the South portrays to the rest of the country and to the world. And so I've never had an emotional attachment to, and we'll call it the Southern Cross. That's another name for what is essentially known as the Confederate flag, even though it was never technically the flag of the Confederacy. I've never had that emotional tie to that symbol. And to me, it always represented slavery and segregation. And I had trouble when people wanted to argue that the flag was just about Southern heritage. But I want to try to look at this as rationally and as emotionlessly as I possibly can, considering that this is big news right now. And then we can also discuss it afterwards and see, is this backlash against this flag justified or not? Now, I want to preface this by saying that if you're going to condemn a symbol, you can certainly and justifiably condemn the symbol of our country today. You absolutely can, and it doesn't take a lot of work. The Stars and Stripes, to many people, is also a symbol of oppression. If you're a Native American, what do you think of that flag? If you were in a country that was invaded by us, and many have been, or our involvement in overthrowing governments in Central America, for instance, or Iran, what do you think of that flag? Okay, so symbols have deep emotional meaning, and our symbol of our country right now has an awful lot of baggage, and I fully acknowledge that. And if you want to burn the U.S. flag for various reasons, doesn't bother me. I understand why. Okay? But we're not talking about the U.S. and its crimes today, because we've certainly had some, but we've also had a lot of good. And as with any human institution, there is a mixture of both. Okay, so we acknowledge that. This isn't a discussion of good versus evil, with the North being good and the South being bad. That is not the case. And anyone who tries to make it that simple doesn't know all the facts. So I want to focus on the Confederate flags, and I'm actually going to show you the flags so you actually get some of the history of this, and the legacy of the South, because I live here and I care about this region, I care about this state, this is home to me, and I don't want to be known as a group of people who take pride in a history of slavery or segregation. I don't want that to be the Southern legacy, and to a lot of people it is, justifiably or not. That's what you tie to the South. One of the aftermaths of the shooting is a move to get the Confederate battle standard taken down from a flagpole in South Carolina on the State House lawn. The flag was first flown in 1962. It was raised in a response to the federal court order to desegregate the South. That flag became a symbol of resistance to desegregation in South Carolina and many other southern states. In 2000, the flag was removed from the State House dome, and flown on the lawn as part of a Confederate soldier memorial. And it's still on government property. Other things that have happened in the last couple of weeks are that many stores have refused to carry any of these flags for sale anymore, including Walmart, Amazon, eBay, Etsy, which I've never heard of, Sears, Google, and Target. 4 major U.S. flag manufacturers have said they will stop making this flag. Valley Forge Flag, and in flag makers Elder Flag and Dixie Flag Manufacturing Company all announced they will stop selling Confederate flags. There have probably been even more reactions. I've stopped keeping track of it as I was updating my sermon. Symbolism has power, and this symbol has now become very emotional for people, are reacting to the shooting, reacting to racism, reacting to a hidden desire to still have segregation on the part of many people in the South. And people are saying, we can't fix all the problems, but we can get rid of this flag, and the flag has become the target. It's an easy thing to do. Fixing racism is not easy to do. Getting rid of a flag is easy, makes us all feel better, but doesn't fix the problem, really. Nonetheless, even symbolic actions can be good things, and that's what we're going to be wrestling with today. Symbolism has power, and the image of white racists proudly holding up a Confederate flag before going to a church and murdering people is an image that is now burned into the minds of many people in this country, and they're reacting to it. But as I said, it's a whole lot easier to blame a flag than to blame the system and the institutions that lead to this, to blame the people who perpetuate the discrimination and the racism. So I'm going to wade into the dangerous waters of Civil War segregation, symbology, slavery, all the things that get people really emotionally riled up in the South, because I felt like doing an easy sermon after the holidays. There are a couple of things that whenever you get into the discussion, they almost become gotcha moments, like, oh, you said something wrong, gotcha, therefore the rest of your argument's irrelevant. So 2 of these are very simple and straightforward. I'll touch on them briefly and then we're going to talk about them. The first one is, if you call that flag that you see everywhere, red flag, blue cross, 13 white stars on it, we'll call it the Southern Cross or the Confederate flag for simplicity. If you say that's the flag of the Confederacy, someone's going to say, oh no, you don't know what you're talking about. That was never the flag of the Confederate States of America. And they're right. It never was. It never was. I'll show you what those flags were. But that symbol, nonetheless, has become a symbol of the South and of the Confederacy, even though technically never the flag of the Confederate States of America. And it is certainly the most recognizable of all the Confederate flags, no question. Just yesterday, as we were going to the grocery store on the 4th of July, there was a guy driving around with a pickup truck with 2 huge, gigantic, very large Confederate, I'm surprised the truck didn't tip over, Confederate flags. And I don't think he was actually going anywhere because he just kept going back and forth and driving around. And I think he's just showing these 2 flags. What's the message he's trying to say? I didn't get out to talk to him, probably wisely.
Yes.
But what's your point? It's the 4th of July. We're celebrating the birth of the the Declaration of Independence for the United States of America. Why are we doing this? Secondly, if you ever say the Civil War was about slavery, wham. No, it wasn't. And you know what? Technically, it wasn't. Okay, the Southern states seceded for a reason. They seceded because they wanted to maintain the institution of slavery, because it was the foundation of their economics. The northern states went to war to force them to stay in the Union. That was the stated purpose. Abraham Lincoln said, that's why we're fighting this war, to keep the nation together. They weren't going to war to free the slaves, but almost 3 million soldiers fought in this war, and each of those soldiers had their own motivation, protecting their homeland, or fighting to free the slaves, because certainly soldiers in the North wrote back home and said that's why they were involved, that's why they volunteered. So on an individual basis, the motives for fighting in this war are as varied as there are soldiers participating. And the government statements as to why they're doing things also have political implications. I mean, ultimately, in one sense, this war was all about slavery. It was. But on a technical level, you can say it wasn't. But that doesn't change the fact that the lives of all those people who were enslaved in the South, what was going to happen to them? Would they remain property, or would they at least technically be free, even though still impoverished, still mistreated? That war determined that outcome. So, technically it's true. The Civil War wasn't about freeing the slaves, if that makes you sleep better at night. But the underlying point of all of this was the economic implications of slavery or losing those slaves. And now we're going to go to the slideshow. Hopefully this works. So there's the flag I'm talking about. You'll notice this one's square. This is the battle standard of the Army of Northern Virginia. This is the flag they carried into battle. This one, the more rectangular version, was used by the Army of Tennessee. And these two flags with a slightly lighter blue color and the cross were used by the Confederate Navy. One was flown when at sea, and one was flown when in port. So, these flags were used in battle, they were used by the Navy, but they were not the flags of the Confederate States of America. This is the first flag of the Confederate States of America. It's called the Stars and Bars. Sometimes people call that the Stars and Bars. It is not. Call it the Southern Cross if you need to have a name for it. That is the Stars and Bars. Similar to the United States of America in that you have red and white stripes, however, only 3. Much thicker, therefore the term bars. Initially, there were 7 states that seceded from the Union, thus the 7 stars. As more states left, they added stars. So there's 9, 11, and this is 13, including Kentucky and Missouri, which technically never seceded, but the South considered them part of the Confederacy later on. So that's as many stars as the South gets right there. That flag only lasted for a couple of years. Then we moved to this flag, the stainless banner, from May 1963 to March 1863 to March 1865, which was just a month before the war ended. Now you have that beloved battle standard incorporated into the Confederate States of America flag, but you also have this huge white field. And of this flag, its designer, William Tappan Thompson, wrote and said this: "As a people, we are fighting to maintain the heaven-ordained supremacy of the white man over the inferior or colored race. A white flag would thus be emblematic of our cause. A national emblem, it is significant of our higher cause, the cause of a superior race, a higher civilization contending against ignorance, infidelity, and barbarism." He also wrote that this flag would be hailed by the nations of the world as the white man's flag. Now this is the designer. You will not find this in any statement by any of the Confederate states. This is the designer's opinion of why this flag is white.
Wow.
Now, if you carry this flag into battle, can you see a problem? If the wind's not blowing and it's just draped down, you have a white surrender flag. And after a couple of years of that, they said, maybe we should change it a little bit. So they put a big red bar. This is the bloodstained banner. It only lasted for 2 months at most and was hardly used at all because the war was about to end. But that was designed to signify the blood shed by all the soldiers who had fought up to this point and to make it clear that it wasn't a surrender flag. Modern flags that do incorporate Confederate symbology is the flag of Georgia, adopted in 2003. On the bottom, you see the flag of the Confederate States of America. And on the top, the exact same flag with something added in the center of the stars, with a logo added. This is the Confederate flag, slightly modified, flown by Georgia today.
Wow.
This is Mississippi today with the Confederate battle standard. Symbols do change, however, and I want to show how symbols' meanings change. This is a statue of the Buddha. Can you see what's on his chest?
Hi, Hitler.
It's not technically a swastika, by the way. It's reversed. It's a manji, but it sure looks like it. These were found in the United States of America in the early 20th century. If you can't read it, on the left side it says swastika, good luck, light, life, and love. And on the right, the American flag with a swastika that says, may our glorious flag and this lucky star guide you and keep you wherever you are. See, the swastika didn't used to be the symbol of the Nazis. You could find them in ancient cultures, China, Tibet, and there is the Buddhist manji. You can see that it's reversed from what a swastika would look like. Tibet shows you the spiral that a Nazi swastika uses. The word is from the Sanskrit, and it means good fortune or well-being. If that isn't ironic, there is nothing in the world that is ironic, that the Nazis would adopt this symbol. Today, people are fighting back against the fact that the Nazis destroyed a symbol of good luck and good fortune. So on the left, you see a poster that says, this is evil with the Nazi flag, and this is not, showing the swastika before it had been corrupted. And on the right, keep calm and reclaim the swastika. There's actually a movement in Europe to try to rehabilitate the swastika because, I don't know the motives of everyone behind this, but they're saying this is a symbol of ancient Asian religions, and even in Europe, you can even find Christian symbology using the swastika. It's used everywhere, and it was never a sign of evil till the Nazis got a hold of it. But today, you just can't look at it without thinking of some of the greatest evil that ever existed on this planet. Is it worth trying to rehabilitate this symbol when there are people who still remember the evil it caused? Here's something you can actually buy. You can buy t-shirts and cups from Cafe Press. It's this is the manji, not the swastika, and it says 100% Buddhist. Would you wear this on a t-shirt today? It's true. It's absolutely technically true. There's nothing evil about that symbol. But would you wear it? No. Because it is tied to the Nazis, even though it's not even the same symbol. You just can't get past that. Symbols have power. They reside in our corporate memory as humans. And sometimes that's just irreversible, I would say. So this is technically true, but I doubt they sell many of these. And if you did, you'd probably get beat up or assumed to be a white supremacist. So the Confederate flags, which I showed you, were about a civil war that was fought. But in 1948, it became a symbol of the Dixiecrats. And this flag in between those 2 points was largely used just by Confederate groups that were honoring the dead and at memorials, and it hadn't become this huge Southern symbol. But in 1948, Strom Thurmond, some of you still remember him, actually ran for president as an alternative Democratic candidate, and they actually got Harry Truman knocked off the ballot in 4 states, and the Dixiecrats won those 4 states. And this was their symbol, and they were fighting against segregation. And that's what that flag came to symbolize. So, the symbol of that flag, and we're done with the slides now. The Confederate flag, the Southern Cross, whatever you want to call it, went from being a symbol of a group of states that fought to secede from the Union to maintain slavery to a political movement to maintain and stand up for segregation. And that remained true throughout the 60s when the court orders came down to desegregate, and South Carolina raised that flag over the state dome. So the symbol changed, but still it represented white power and the oppression of the black people. So we're going to look a little bit now at the Civil War and some of these causes, because I'm not just going to touch on it. I'm not going to be giving you my opinion now. I'm just reading from documents, because we want to understand the Southern economic situation was based on slavery. And there was a small group of people, less than 2% in the South, who actually owned slaves. And there's a thing going around Facebook about the irony that in the Civil War, 2% of the people managed to get everyone to fight a war so that those 2% of people could keep their slaves and maintain their economic power. Which happens in many wars, by the way, where the rich manage to get the poor to fight their battles so they can stay rich. The Declaration of Immediate Causes, which induce and justify the secession of South Carolina from the federal union. This is the document they wrote to explain why they were seceding from the union. We affirm that these ends for which the government was instituted have been defeated, and the government itself has been made destructive of them by the action of non-slaveholding states. Those states have assumed the right of deciding upon the propriety of our domestic institutions and have denied the rights of property, slavery, the slaves, established in 15 of the states and recognized by the Constitution. They have denounced as sinful the institution of slavery. South Carolina is leaving because the northern states have said slavery is sinful. This is one of their arguments. By the way, one of the other things they argue is that the northern states are not returning escaped slaves. This is our property. You need to return it. The Constitution says you have to return those slaves, and you're not doing it. Here's another line. They have encouraged and assisted thousands of our slaves to leave their homes, and those who remain have been incited by emissaries, books, and pictures to servile insurrection. They go on to talk about the election of Lincoln, which was the trigger point, by the way. When Abraham Lincoln was elected, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, if you would. The straw that said we can no longer remain one country. A geographical line has been drawn across the Union, and the states north of that line have united in the election of a man to the high office of President of the United States whose opinions and purposes are hostile to slavery. He is to be entrusted with the administration of the common government because he declared that government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free, and that the public mind must rest in the belief that slavery is in the course of ultimate extinction. So South Carolina is leaving, and if you read the full document, which is easily accessible on the internet, slavery is mentioned about 19 times. Okay, slavery was the undermining reason the southern states left, because it was the foundation of their economy. Texas writes, this one's got some good lines in it. In all the non-slaveholding states, in violation of that good faith and comity which should exist between entirely distinct nations, the people have formed themselves into a great sectional party, now strong enough in numbers to control the affairs of each of those states, based upon an unnatural feeling of hostility to the southern states and their beneficent and patriarchal system of African slavery. Oh, those northern states. They are opposed to our beneficent and patriarchal system of African slavery, proclaiming the debasing doctrine of equality of all men. Texas was upset with this debasing doctrine that all men are equal, irrespective of race or color. A doctrine at war with nature, in opposition to the experience of mankind, and in violation of the plainest revelations of divine law. God made it clear we're not equal, and those stupid northern states insist that we treat all people equally. It's time to leave the Union. Mississippi. Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world. Its labor supplies the product which constitutes by far the largest and most important portions of commerce of the earth. These products are peculiar to the climate verging on the tropical regions, and by an imperious law of nature, none but the black race can bear exposure to the tropical sun. These products have become necessities of the world, and a blow at slavery is a blow at commerce and civilization. That blow has long been aimed at the institution and was at the point of reaching its consummation. There was no choice left us but submission to the mandates of abolition or a dissolution of the Union, whose principles have been subverted to work out our ruin. That we do not overstate the dangers to our institution, a reference to a few facts will sufficiently prove. So there's some examples. Okay, you can argue that the Civil War wasn't about slavery. You cannot argue that secession wasn't about slavery. It was about the fact that, and in fairness, if you made slavery illegal, the Southern economy would take a huge hit. It had been built on slavery. No question about that. And it is very easy to be moral when it doesn't hit you in the pocketbook.
Exactly.
Okay? And we do that today. We do that today. So let's not be morally superior ourselves right now. I have absolute belief that as technology advances and we find ways to create more and more realistic meat substitute products, there will come a time where we will no longer use animal factories to produce the meat that everyone eats. And at some point in 100 or 200 years, we're going to look back, those people will look back at us, the barbarians today, who abused and mistreated animals just so they could eat. And with the same contempt that we look back on slaveholders, they will look back on us and say, those people were so barbaric. How could they do something so awful and treat living things so badly? Okay, so let's not get too morally superior. It's easy for the North to say slavery's bad because their economy didn't depend on it anymore. This does not change for one instance the evilness of slavery. Don't get me wrong. But I'm trying to point out that people didn't institute slavery just because they were evil. They did it because economically it helped them make money. Follow the money. Follow the money. That's true of so many things. Just follow the money. So now the symbol. We're back to the flag now. The Southern Cross, the Confederate flag, the North Virginia battle standard, whatever you want to call it. Try to imagine what this symbol means to you if you are black. It's hard to do. I'm a white man. I have all the privilege and none of the oppression that minorities or women have faced in this country. And when people point out or like to say how wise and wonderful our founding fathers were, just remember, when the Constitution was written, slavery was legal. And all those founding fathers made sure that women didn't get to vote, that slavery was legal, and that in fact even white men didn't get to vote unless they were landowners. Okay? Things evolve over time. And our Constitution was written at a time where a great many evils were going on. And let's not glorify or give godly intentions to people who are just humans working within their society and their time frame. So I can't fully appreciate what it is to have been oppressed in the way someone who's descended from slaves can appreciate it. And to have to constantly look at those flags, which symbolize, to me, slavery or segregation. I can't understand the anger or the hurt that they must feel. I can imagine it, try to, but to have actually had to live with that and have that put in your face time and time and time and time again in the South. I don't understand why people fly it. I don't understand why people try to justify it. I personally don't understand it. If you disagree with me, we can discuss it during the talk back. That's why we do this. I don't claim to have all the answers. But I just can't help but feel that that is a hurtful symbol beyond my imaginings. But it is a symbol. The flag did not kill anybody. An evil man killed 9 people. The ideology behind that flag certainly played a role. The idea that the equality of all men is debasing, as the state of Texas declared when they left the Union. That's the ideology of a killer. The idea that slavery was a beneficent system, to quote Texas again, is ludicrous and should invite ridicule. And yet I've heard people argue that the slaves were so much better off here in the States because they could at least hear the gospel and have their souls saved instead of dying in darkness of ignorance in Africa under these false religions and then suffering eternal damnation. People make that argument. They made that argument during the war. And by the way, Christians can argue very effectively from the Bible that slavery is okay because the Bible does say slavery is normal and acceptable. And the abolitionists who fought against it had to use general verses like love your neighbor as yourself, because if you go back to the Mosaic Law, the Law of Moses, he goes into incredible detail on how to run a slave economy and how you treat your slaves. So the South had the Bible on their side, as far as I'm concerned. And they could quote chapter and verse, as people do today, to justify whatever hatred, ignorance, or bigotry they want to use. You see it now, right now, with the passage of, or I should say the judgment of the Supreme Court, that now in all 50 states that same-sex marriage is legal. And the backlash has started, and the Bible quoting has started. And there's a huge, long article in today's Sunday paper in Tullahoma where apparently they weren't aware there were ministers who were happy about this ruling because they only quoted 2 Baptists and a Methodist. Almost a full page of, oh, this is so sad, this is terrible. And I know there's other ministers besides me who are happy with this ruling. So shame on you, Tullahoma News. And you can get a hold of me. Just call the Unitarian Universalist Church and I'll do an interview with you. Amazing. Yeah, a little self-plugging there. So symbols have meaning. Symbols do drive people to do things, but symbols in and of themselves are inanimate objects. I got it. I understand it. We still have to think about how our symbols affect others. I would never wear a t-shirt with a manji on it that says 100% Buddhist, even though I like Buddhism. I would never do that, out of respect for the people who suffered under the symbol of the swastika. So in that sense, I can sort of relate to the Confederate flag, because that is a symbol that has deep historical significance to a religion that I participate in. But I still wouldn't do that, just because. Nazis, just because. That's reason enough. There's other ways to do it. We need to see through the eyes of those who have been oppressed. The symbols matter, and we need symbols of inclusion in the South. I want the South to move ahead. I want it to be a place where people are diverse, inclusive, integrated. I don't want to keep fighting the Civil War in Tennessee. And I really don't like seeing the reminders of it. It's time to move on to better things. That's my opinion. So the Confederate flags of any shape, form, or variety have no business on government property. I'm glad to see that there is a movement to get them off government property. An individual can do whatever they want. We're a free country. You want to drive around with 2 giant flags in your truck, you're allowed to. But the government needs to get away from it. I hope we can find other symbols that will point to a unified future. That is what the South needs. If the South is going to rise again, I hope it will rise again in a different way, where we have shed segregation, slavery, white supremacy, the notion that we're better off separate than united as a country. I hope we shed those thoughts. I hope Tennessee becomes a great state. I hope it becomes a leader in these things. That's my desire. May it be so.